Of course, we have our best and brightest, Angela Rayner. Probably the only grandmother on the entire Labour bench, and she's 44. Which I think is actually okay, but that's not the reason that she's...
I cannot understand how someone is... I mean, I would say she's thicker than John Prescott.
Yes.
I mean, and that's saying something.
Yes.
I mean, because he's probably got an IQ of about 100.
Yes.
And so this is below average IQ woman who dropped out of school. If you're American, I mean, we're not joking.
No, we're not joking.
Dropped out of school at 16, 15 even, had a child at 16, brought up in such poverty, so she says, and maybe she exaggerates, that her mum couldn't read, and she ended up eating like cat food because her mum didn't realise it was cat food.
And now she's the deputy prime minister.
Maybe she thought it was what, a tinned cat. I mean, there's pictures on the tin. It's a clue.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not going to be tinned cat.
But I mean, to be fair, I got my tin of tuna, and there's a tuna on it. So
yeah, exactly. That's why I can see that she would make that inference that it would be
a tin of cat. Yeah.
But why would you want to eat cat? Or dog?
Don't know how desperate her family situation must have been.
She's like, wow, I'm so desperate that I'm going to buy a few tins of cat. It looks quite cheap. Get a cat.
Tuna is way cheaper than cat food.
Yeah,
I've got 5 cats. So
and cats eat tuna.
Yeah.
Even cats know. It's crazy. And she obviously, that's the problem with the Labour Party. They have this system where they elect a deputy leader and they elect someone ridiculous like her or John Prescott, or I'm trying to think of a strange thing about what was that slavering, blubbering guy in the 1980s, Roy Hattersley.
Oh, yeah.
And then they're in. And then there's this pressure to make them de facto deputy prime minister, which is obviously insane, because if the prime minister was suddenly killed and the king had to appoint immediately a stand-in prime minister, it obviously couldn't be her. I mean, that just goes without saying. Then there would have to be some sort of royal prerogative, like Alec Douglas-Home, when he was appointed. He'd have to make a decision.
You're right. It'd have to be David Lammy.
It would have to. Well, yeah, obviously. No, presumably it would be the chancellor. But anyway, they'd have to appoint somebody that was intelligent, and they couldn't appoint her. It's absolutely crazy. And then she's being put in charge of policy. With regard to housing, she's the sort of minister of that portfolio.
On the housing thing, you know that the Conservatives actually brought in some beauty legislation when it came to architecture?
And she undid it.
She undid it. And when asked, and aesthetics was quite a large part of my philosophy degree, and the part that I did the best in as well, she basically said there's no point to it. And I was just like, there have been untold stacks of books discussing the subject and merits of aesthetics. And Angela Rayner's just like, that doesn't matter. I was like, oh, God, okay.
Well, it doesn't matter if you're stupid, but even if you're intelligent, it doesn't matter if you are...
Even stupid people can appreciate beauty.
Indeed. If you are a resentful, unhappy person, then a lot of beauty is... and just anything that's nice is other people being happy is unpleasant to you because you are resentful. And often beauty is symmetry and order and structure. And these things are bad because you blame these things for why you're in what you see as, perhaps wrongly, but what you see as your lowly position. Because if you're neurotic, you'll always see yourself as an outsider, even if you're the deputy prime minister.
Yeah.
And so you will be resentful, and you will want to tear down beauty and promote ugliness unconsciously, because ugliness makes people depressed. If people are depressed, they feel there's just no point. Like, there was the study that was in the conference by Ayadin Paladin, and she was saying this, that if people are depressed, then there's no sense of meaning. They don't even try.
Yeah.
So make people depressed, which you are depressed with ugly buildings, because they fill you with disgust, and you just feel this sort of mismatch and just horror. So it's absolutely in her interests to build ugly tower blocks, of which I see so many, to build Swindon as opposed to old Swindon, basically.
Yeah. If you go to the Old Town, it's really lovely.
I went to the Old Town when I was last here.
Yeah.
And then, except that there's this former town hall or whatever it is, which they've allowed to fall into ruin and burn down and whatever. But otherwise, it's basically one street that is Old Swindon. And it's really nice.
There is a bit more to it than that, but it's... Yeah, buildings built, 100 years ago or something like that. And so they're all lovely. And it's like, look, the entire town could look like this. It used to look like this. I don't know why we've allowed it to go this way.
I believe they deliberately pulled down a lot of old buildings.
Yeah, yeah.
And there was, as I think you said in the video I did, the Year Zero.
Yeah.
They wanted to pull down those workers' cottages, those very,
did.
very beautiful cottages that they're nearer to here, aren't they?
They are, yeah.
And there was a campaign against it, thank goodness, and it didn't happen. But they wanted to make Swindon uglier than it is. And fortunately, some people stood in the way. That's what Labour want to do. They want to make England uglier than it already is, which in part is quite ugly.
Well, like England's basically trapped between two worlds at the moment. You've got the de-aestheticized post-Soviet world that the Labour Party have been trying to build since the 1970s. So you've got these insanely ugly buildings that blight the towns and cities. But then as soon as you turn your face away from that, you see the lovely old England that still does exist. And I don't know why we're allowing them to do this to us.
We don't. All I can say is that it goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation, which is that, well, I suppose we're allowing us to do, you know, what my perhaps reductionist, but anyway, scientific theory is on why this has ultimately occurred. But it has to get to, it's almost accelerationist. It has to get to an extreme point before there is a reaction. And I'd love to know what the what's the word I want? The conflation of circumstances is that has permitted us to get to the point where there clearly is now a reaction, even among some quite elite people that wouldn't have dared touch these things until quite recently. But there is a reaction, and the brilliance of it is that the reaction is not among boomers who are now in their 60s and 70s and even 80s almost, and are going to, you know, go the way of the Vikings or whatever, but among young people, and they imagine it. I can't imagine it being brought up genuinely knowing and understanding that your teachers are not very bright and they're liars.
Yeah, and that they've got a general hatred towards you, because I'm sure that a lot of young native British people these days recognise this feeling, this sense of being a second-class citizen in your own country. There are definitely privileges that are extended and considerations and grace that is extended to the minority groups that is withheld from the native British.
I spoke to somebody who said when he was what had pilled him was when he was at university. There was this, I don't know, like civil service work experience paid course or something in the summer, and he could sign up to it. And he signed up to it and he was rejected. And the reason was because it turned out that course was exclusively for ethnic minorities and disabled people.
Do you know my first realization that the world was not being run as it ought was when I was working at the Research Council. So the Research Councils are based here because we don't have a university, so there's no particular university bias. And they control all of the financing for science projects in the UK that the government is involved in. And my boss was female, her boss was female, and the division head, the head of the department, was also female. My immediate sort of line manager was man, but we basically both had the same boss, which was female. So he was, you know, a half a step above me. And so we would, you know, talk quite a lot. And it was fine. I mean, these are all perfectly nice ladies. They did their jobs exactly as they ought. In fact, I quite liked the department manager. She was very on the ball, very cold-faced to petty things, right? But one day they had this women in leadership conference, and I was like, "What?" And they were like, "Yeah, no, we're gonna have a women in leadership conference to try and accelerate the number of women who are getting into positions of leadership." And me and my fellow male grunt co-workers looked at each other and were like, "I think you've won. We don't have any male bosses." But this went ahead, and I was just like, "Isn't that wrong? Are we discriminating on gender? Is that..." Because I was very blue-pilled normally at the time. I was like, "Should we be discriminating on gender? That's not right, is it?" And they were like, "No, it's totally fine." And that's it. And I think that's why I ended up getting fired from that job. Actually.
You were fired?
It wasn't directly because of that, but that then put me on the sort of, "Oh, we're watching you now," and I you know, I didn't do anything wrong, but they basically decided you're not a right fit for this place, and I got fired. And I was like, right, okay. You know, there was nothing wrong with my work.
What were the grounds then?
You know, I don't even know, actually.
You just didn't renew your contract?
Yeah. Essentially, yes. And and I was just like, right, okay, that's weird. But they didn't even make me work out the end of the contract either. So it was just like, it was very clearly a personal thing where they had obviously identified me as, oh, he's questioning what would become the woke order. We'll just, get him out of the thing. And I was like, okay, that's really weird. Because I'd worked really hard. I'd been part of a project where I was doing loads of extra hours just to get a website from one system to another, basically, and I was just doing lots of dog work, really. But I'd done really hard. I worked really hard, and I was really good at my job, and that didn't matter at all. It was suddenly, enemy, was gonna, and so I was like, okay.
I don't know if there was a specific thing that read. Well, no, I do know. It was when I was about 15, and I was doing work experience at a solicitor's office, and I was very interested in the fact that there was about to be an election. In '97, there would be the following year there would be an election, and it would be this big election that certain Labour would win.
Yeah.
And there were all these different political parties standing because you only had to field 50 seats to get a party election broadcast.
Right.
And I found this very interesting. And so I wrote off to the different, in those days, through the telephone directory, the different political parties. I rang them up, and they sent me their information packs. And then I wrote a sort of book about summary of each of the political parties, what they stood for in their history. And then I sold it around the school for 50p. And people, it was my first venture into publishing. A number of teachers bought it, whatever. And one of those parties was, well, obviously you can guess which one. And they had a sort of a bookshop where you could buy pamphlets essentially and books. And I purchased 3 books. Well, 2 of them that stick in my mind were IQ and the Race Problem. One was called.
Yeah.
And the other one was oh, sorry, cut that out. And the other one was called The Biology of Racial Differences. So we'll cut this bit out. So we'll stop this bit. Okay. I read a similar experience, and I read these various books, and they indicated to me various pieces of information which are, shall we say, not widely discussed in wider society for reasons of political correctness, put it like that. And this opened my eyes to the fact that, hang on, there are things that I'm not being told. There's a different viewpoint on things to the viewpoint that I'm being informed about. This was and it's so controversial that you may have noticed that I've used various euphemisms for this even in this interview.
I'm surprised those books were even carried by the library.
They weren't carried by the library. They were carried by this political party.
Right.
On their sort of own little sort of, as it were, bookshop.
Right.
And so that was, okay. And so for some reason, I was able to suppress that information until much older. I don't know quite why, but I was able to not talk about it and not discuss it until I was a postgraduate. And then I just noted the insanity of how, like, for me to get a PhD place, you had to work hard, get good grades, whatever, get funding. And for foreigners, they just let them in because they paid fees.
Isn't it a kind of subconscious admission of what's in these books is at least valid to talk about if they act differently towards different races and employ different standards?
Yes, it is. Yeah, that they have to do so. They wouldn't have to do so otherwise. Yeah. And another instance that I was already pretty much clear on what I thought by then, was that I was put up for this job at the University of Manchester, it was, lecturing religious studies. And the idea was that I would do field work with with mosques and things. And I didn't get the job, and I was told, like by someone that was in the department, that we would have given you the job and you were the best qualified, you were the best, but it was felt that we should give the job to an Asian woman.
Ah, well.
So it was like absolutely clear, but he told me this confidentially. He didn't write it down. Yeah. So I was like, "What?" And it was felt there was this Asian woman applicant. It was felt.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.